Tuesday, and welcome back to Resident Evil 0. Today, I'm actually going to do something a little bit different, and we'll get to that in just one second. Before I do, though, I do want to say thank you very much for coming out and watching the video. I hope you enjoy it. If you're new here, go ahead and subscribe, go ahead and leave a comment and a like, all that kind of fun internet stuff. Let's get into what the actual meat of this video will be, besides me running around. I am going to read to you Chapter 1 and the prologue for the Resident Evil 0 adaptation novel by S.D. Perry. I'm doing this because I actually really enjoyed the novel. I finished reading it earlier, and it was a lot of fun to read, and I'm very happy I picked it back up. This is one of the few novels of this Resident Evil series that she wrote that I'd never read. And I decided I was going to read the prologue in Chapter 1 because I actually really enjoyed her writing and found it to be a bit evocative and just fun. It's not not your Tales of Two Cities, but at the same time, it's not meant to be. It's meant to be enjoyed. And so we're going to look at it, and, well, I'm going to look at it because I'm going to read it, and you're going to listen to it. So let's go ahead and get into it. Before we do, I do want to warn everyone that about the 10-minute mark, for about 40 seconds or so, there was some weird recording issues that occurred between my computer and the PS4 and all that kind of stuff, so there'll be some like screen tearing and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't last for the whole video, it's just about a 40-second period, around 10 minutes. With that, let me go ahead and get into Resident Evil 0 Hour Prologue. The train swayed and rocked as it traveled through the Raccoon Woods. The thunder of its wheels echoed by a thundering twilight sky. Bill Nyberg rifled through the Hardy file, his briefcase on the floor at his feet. It had been a long day, and the gentle rocking of the train soothed him. It was late, after 8, but the Ecliptic Express was mostly full, as it often was for the dinner hour. It was a company train, and since the renovation, Umbrella had gone to great expense to make it classically retro. Everything from velvet seats to chandeliers in the dining car. A lot of employees brought family or friends along to experience the atmosphere. There were usually a number of out-of-towners on board as well, having caught the connection out of Latham. But Nyberg would have bet that 9 out of 10 of them worked for Umbrella too. Without the pharmaceutical giant's support, Raccoon City wouldn't have even been a spot in the road. One of the car attendants walked past, nodding at Nyberg when he saw the umbrella pin on his lapel. The small pin marked him as a regular commuter. Nyberg nodded back. A flicker of lightning outside was quickly followed by another rumble of thunder. It seemed there was a summer storm brewing. Even in the cool comfort of the train, the air seemed charged, thick with the tension of impending rain. And, my coat is in the trunk. Wonderful. His car was at the far end of the station lot, too. He'd be drenched before he got halfway across. Sighing, he returned his attention to the file, settling back into his seat. He'd already reviewed the material a number of times, but he wanted to be on top of every detail. A 10-year-old girl named Teresa Hardy had been involved in a clinical trial for a new pediatric heart medicine, Valafin. As it turned out, the drug did exactly what it was supposed to do, but it also caused renal failure. And in Teresa Hardy's case, the damage had been severe. She'd survive, but would likely spend the rest of her life on dialysis, and the family's lawyer was seeking hefty damages. The case had to be settled quickly. The Hardy family kept quiet before they could drag their ailing, cherub-cheeked moppet in front of a media-packed courtroom, which was where Nyberg and his team came in. The trick was to offer just enough to make the family happy, but not so much as to encourage their lawyer, one of those strip mall, "we don't get paid unless you get paid" outfits, to get greedy. Nyberg had a knack for handling ambulance chasers. He'd have it settled before Teresa got back from her first treatment. It was what Umbrella paid him for. Rain spattered loudly against the window, as though someone had thrown a bucket of water against the pane. Startled, Nyberg turned to look just as several dull thumps sounded on the train's roof. Terrific. Had to be a hailstorm or something. A crackle of lightning flickered across the thickening darkness, illuminating the small but steep hill that marked the deepest part of the forest. Nyberg looked up and saw a tall figure silhouetted against the trees at the crest of the hill. Someone in a long coat or robe, the dark fabric rippling in the wind. The figure raised long arms to the raging sky. And the stutter of lightning was gone, plunging the strange, dramatic scene back into darkness. Whoa, what the? Nyberg began, and more water splashed across the glass. Except it wasn't water, because water didn't stick in great, dark clumps. Water didn't ooze and break apart, revealing dozens of shining needle teeth. Nyberg blinked, not sure what he was seeing, as someone started to scream at the other end of the car. A long, rising wail, as more of the dark, slug-like creatures, each the size of a man's fist, smashed against the window. The sound of hail on the roof went from a patter to a storm, the thunder of it drowning out the screamer, the screams of many now. Not hail. That's not hail. Hot panic shot through Nyberg's body, sending him to his feet. He made it to the aisle before the glass behind him shattered. Before glass all through the train was shattering, the high, jagged sound of it melding with the screams of terror, all of it nearly lost beneath the ongoing thunder of attack. As the lights went out, something cold and wet and very much alive landed on the back of his neck and began to feed. Chapter 1. The helicopter spun through the darkness over Raccoon Forest. Rebecca Chambers sat up straight, willing herself to look as calm as the men around her. The mood was solemn, as dark and clouded as the skies whipping past. All jokes and jabs left behind at the briefing. This wasn't a training exercise. 3 more people, hikers, had gone missing. In a forest as large as the one surrounding Raccoon, not that unusual. But with the rash of savage murders that had terrorized the small city over the past several weeks, missing had taken on a new meaning. Only a few days earlier, there had been a 9th victim found. This one as ripped up and savaged as if it had been run through a meat grinder. People were being killed, savagely attacked by someone or something around the outskirts of the city. And the Raccoon police weren't getting anywhere. The city's chapter of STARS had finally been called in to investigate. Rebecca raised her chin slightly, a pulse of pride edging through her nervousness. Although her degree was in biochemistry, she'd been tapped as Bravo Team's field medic, joining the team less than a month earlier.
I'll check over there.
Yeah.
My first mission, which means I'd better not cock it up. She took a deep breath, letting it out slowly, working to keep her expression casual. Edward shot her an encouraging smile and slowly leaned across the crowded cabin to reassuringly pat her leg. So much for looking cool. As smart as she was, as ready as she was to begin her career, she couldn't help her age, or the fact that she looked even younger. At 18, she was the youngest person to be accepted into the STARS since its creation in 1967. And as the only female on Raccoon's B team, everyone treated her like their kid sister. She sighed, smiling back at Edward, nodding at Sully. It wasn't so bad, having a handful of hard-ass big brothers watching out for her, as long as they understood she could take care of herself when the need arose. I think, she silently amended. It was her first assignment, after all.
Come on.
And though she was in good shape physically, her combat experience had been limited to video simulations and weekend missions. The Special Tactics and Rescue Service wanted her in their labs, eventually. But field time was mandatory, and she needed the experience. Anyway, they'd be sweeping the woods as a team. If they did run across the people or animals that had been attacking Raccoon citizens, she'd have backup. There was a flicker of lightning to the north, close. The subsequent thunder lost to the drone of the copter. Rebecca leaned forward slightly, scanning the dark. It had been clear all day, the clouds rolling in just before sunset. They were definitely going to go home wet. At least it would be a warm rain, she supposed. It could be a lot... Boom! She'd been so focused on the coming storm that for a crazed split second, she thought it was thunder. Even as the helicopter tipped wildly and dropped, a terrible, rising, clattering whine filling the cabin, the floor vibrating beneath her boots, a hot smell of burning metal and ozone singed her nose. Lightning? What happened? Someone shouted. Enrico, riding shotgun. Engine failure, the pilot, Kevin Dooley, shouted back. Emergency landing! Rebecca grabbed the strut and held on, looked to the others so she wouldn't have to watch the trees rushing up at them. She saw the grim, determined set to Sully's jaw, Edward's clenched teeth. The look of anxiety shot between Richard and Forrest as they grabbed for struts or handholds on the shuddering wall. In the front, Enrico was shouting something else, something she couldn't make out over the scream of the dying engine. Rebecca closed her eyes for a beat, thought of her parents, and then the ride was too wild for her to think. The crack and crash of tree branches battering the helicopter, too loud and jarring for her to do anything but hope. The copter spun out of control, whipping around in a tilting, sickening, lurching circle. It was over a second later. The silence so sudden and complete that she thought she'd gone deaf. All movement stopped. Then she heard the tick of metal, the strangled last gasp of the engine, and her own thundering heart, and realized that they were down. Kevin had done it, and without a single bounce. Everyone okay? Enrico Marini, their captain, was craned around in his seat. Rebecca added her own shaky nod to the chorus of affirmations. Nice flying, Kev, Forrest said, and there was another chorus. Rebecca couldn't have agreed more. Is the radio down? Enrico asked the pilot, who was tapping at controls and flipping switches. Looks like everything electrical is fried, Kevin said. It must have been the lightning. We weren't struck directly, but it was close enough. The beacon, too. Can it be repaired? Enrico addressed it as an open question, looking at Richard, their communications officer. Richard in turn looked at Edward, who shrugged. Edward was Bravo Team's mechanic. I'll take a look, Edward said. But if Kev says the transmitter's toast, it's probably toast. The captain nodded slowly, absently brushing at his mustache with one hand as he considered their options. After a few seconds he sighed. I called it in when we were hit, but I don't know if it went through, he said. We'll have our last coordinates, though. If we don't report in pretty soon, they'll come looking. They was the Star's Alpha team. Rebecca nodded along with the others, not sure if she should be disappointed or not. Her first mission, over before it started. Enrico wiped at his mustache again, smoothing it down at the corners of his mouth, with the thumb and forefinger of one hand. Everybody out. Let's see where we are. They filed out of the cabin, the reality of the situation hitting Rebecca as they gathered together in the dark. They were incredibly lucky to be alive. Struck by lightning on our way to search for mad killers, no less, she thought, amazed at the very idea. Even after the mission was over, this was hands down the most exciting thing that had ever happened to her. The air was warm and heavy with impending rain, the shadows deep. Small animals rustled through the underbrush. A pair of flashlights clicked on, the beams cutting through the dark as Enrico and Edward moved around the helicopter, examining the damage. Rebecca fished her own flashlight out of her bag, relieved that she hadn't forgotten to pack it. How ya holdin' up? Rebecca turned and saw Ken, Sully Sullivan, grinning down at her. He had his weapon out, the 9mm muzzle pointed to the overcast sky, a grim reminder of why they were there in the first place. You guys really know how to make an entrance, don't you? She said, smiling back at him. The tall man laughed, his teeth very white against the darkness of his skin. Actually, we always do this for the new recruits. It's a waste of helicopters, but we have our reputation to maintain. She was about to ask how the police chief felt about the expense. She was new to the area, but she'd heard that Chief Irons was notoriously stingy, when Enrico joined them, pulling his own weapon and raising his voice so everyone could hear. All right, people, let's fan out. investigate the surrounding area. Kev, stay with the copter. The rest of you, keep close. I just want this area secured. Alpha could be here in as little as an hour. He didn't complete the thought. That it could be a hell of a lot longer. But he didn't need to. For the moment, at least. They were on their own. Rebecca slid the 9mm out of its holster, carefully checking the magazine and chamber as she'd been taught, raising the muzzle to avoid inadvertently aiming at anyone. The others were moving out to either side, checking weapons and turning on flashlights. She took a deep breath and started to walk straight ahead, swinging the flashlight beam around in front of her. Enrico was only a few meters away, moving parallel to her position. A low mist had cropped up, wafting through the underbrush like a ghostly tide. There was a parting in the trees about a dozen meters ahead, a path big enough to be a narrow road, though it was hard to tell for the mist. It was quiet, except for a rumble of thunder, the sound closer than she would have expected. The storm was almost upon her. She swept the beam across the trees in darkness and the trees again. Then a glimpse of what looked like... Captain, look! Enrico stepped to her side, and within seconds, 5 more beams of light had jerked toward the gleam of metal she'd seen, illuminating what was, in fact, a narrow dirt road, and an overturned jeep. Rebecca could see MP etched on the side as the team moved closer. Military police. She saw a pile of clothes spilling out from beneath the shattered windshield and frowned, stepping in for a better look. And then she was holstering her weapon and fumbling for her medkit, hurrying over to kneel next to the crashed jeep, knowing even before she sat back on her heels that there was nothing she could do. There was just too much blood. 2 men. One had been thrown clear, was crumpled a few meters away. The other, a fair-haired man in front of her, was still half under the jeep. Both wore military fatigues. Their faces and upper bodies had been badly mutilated. There were massive tears through skin and muscle, deep gashes across their throats. No way the crash had done it all. Rebecca reflexively reached down and felt for a pulse, noting the chill of flesh. She stood and moved to the other body again, checking for any signs of life. But he was as cold as the first. You think they're from Ragathon? Someone asked. Richard. Rebecca saw a briefcase near the pale, outstretched hand of the second corpse and crouch-walked to it, half listening to Enrico's answer as she flipped the case's lid. It's the closest base, but look at the insignia. They're jarheads. Could be from Donnell, Enrico said. A clipboard was on top of a handful of files, an official-looking document attached to it. There was a small headshot in the upper left corner of a handsome, dark-eyed young man in civvies. Neither of the corpses looked like him. Rebecca lifted it out, reading silently, and then her mouth went dry. Captain, she managed, standing. Enrico looked up from where he was crouched next to the jeep. What happened? She read the pertinent parts aloud. Court order for transportation. Prisoner William Cohen, ex-lieutenant, 26 years old. Court-martialed and sentenced to death July 22nd. Prisoner is to be transferred to the Ragathon base for execution. The lieutenant had been convicted of first-degree murder. Edward pulled the clipboard from her hands, saying what was already forming in Rebecca's mind, his voice heavy with anger. These poor soldiers, they were just doing their jobs, and that scum murdered them and escaped. Enrico took the clipboard away from him, scanning it quickly. All right, everyone, change of plan. We may have an escaped killer on our hands. Let's separate and survey the immediate area. See if we can't locate Lieutenant Billy. Keep your guard up and report back in 15, regardless. There were nods all around. Rebecca took a deep breath as the others started to move out, checking her watch, determined to be as professional as anyone else on the team. 15 minutes alone? No big deal. What could happen in 15 minutes, alone, in the dark, dark woods? Got your radio? Rebecca jumped and turned at the sound of Edward's voice. The big man standing directly behind her. The mechanic patted her on the shoulder, smiling. Easy, kiddo. Rebecca smiled back at him, though she despised being called kiddo. Edward was only 26, for God's sake. She tapped the unit on her belt. Check. Edward nodded, stepping away. His message was clear and reassuring. She wasn't really alone. Not as long as she had her radio. She looked around, saw that several of the others were already out of sight. Kevin, still in the pilot's seat, was going through the briefcase that she'd found. He saw her and snapped her a salute. Rebecca gave him a thumbs up and squared her shoulders, drawing her weapon once more and heading out into the night. Overhead, thunder. Alright guys, I'm actually going to end the reading there. That is not the full part of Chapter 1, that's actually just the beginning of Chapter 1. But there is another 19 pages to go on my Kindle, and I only have 6 minutes of video left. And that's not going to fit in 6 minutes of video. So instead, for these last few minutes, I am going to give you a overall reaction I had to the book. Now, from what I can recall, this is actually my first time reading this book. I don't believe I've read it before. I've read most of the other books in her Resident Evil collection that she's written, and they were a lot of fun. But this book, I have to say, I really did enjoy. I haven't read her other books. She's well known for writing movie adaptations and all that kind of stuff, from what I can see from her overall library and collection. And it seems to me, at the very least, that she enjoyed writing these books. It doesn't come across as I did it for the monies kind of deal. It comes across as, yeah, she gets paid for it, but she liked the story that she was translating into a book version. I'm not sure if I talked about it at the beginning of the video, just because it's been 20 minutes for you guys. Well, a little over 20. But it's been much longer for me as I've read this book and edited and all that kind of stuff. But she did a great job of adapting the puzzles and all that kind of stuff too in this book from what they are in the video game. She gave a good reason, in my opinion, for why she was able to skip past a lot of the puzzles, and at the same time also include some of the puzzles. And it was well done. I really enjoyed seeing her methodology in this book for making a game into a book, in a sense. Because you can't put everything that's in the game in the book. You don't want to read about someone running back and forth through a train to get everything, or a building to get all the puzzles figured out, and collect a key here to go to there, and all that. So she did really great in streamlining the video game in a way that is entertaining and makes sense. Now, because of the way the book series was released, basically she was releasing them as games would come out here and there, and she was licensed to release the books. There are some parts that don't fit into the other books she's written because they were written before 0 Hour. And she addresses that at the beginning of her book, saying, hey, look, read the book and have fun. We understand that there's some discrepancies between what I've written compared to what's come before, and it's because of the fact that this game came out after I wrote those other books. And it's the same thing that happened with the video games themselves. Because the games were released, you had to play around with some of the facts and all that kind of stuff to make it work. Well, she did a great job. As I said, it is $2.99 plus tax on the Kindle store. It is worth buying and worth reading. And it's one of those books that I think you could sit down and read for 15-20 minutes before you go to sleep at night and have actually a pretty good rest, because her books are a great way to unwind from your day, actually. They don't wind you up the same way like sometimes watching YouTube videos and all that might. And it's a good way to relax your brain and decompress. So I would recommend this book. You might be able to find other people reading it online on YouTube if you just want to listen to it. Kind of like the books on tape kind of deal. So there you go. It is a well-written book. It is not, Tale of Two Cities, but it's a fun book, worth a read, worth trying to find to read at the very least, in the best way you can. But if you can support the author, buy it. I really think it was worth the $3 I spent. All right, guys, I'm gonna let you go. we'll finish up whatever's left of this video. I don't think it should be too much. And have a good one. We'll see you next Thursday for the next Resident Evil 0, or you can come back tomorrow on Wednesday to watch the Dive Bomb Predaking review. Alright guys, chill. Bye.